Welcome everyone to our KuppingerCole webinar, Trust No One, Zero Trust Strategy and Design. The speakers today are Anshuman Goswami, who is Associate Vice President of Persistent Systems, Milan Patel, who is Product Manager at IBM, and me, Martin Kuppinger, I'm Principal Analyst at KuppingerCole Analyst. This webinar is supported by Persistent Systems. Before we start, some quick information about housekeeping and our upcoming European Identity Conference, and after that we'll directly dive into the subject of today's webinar. So September 13th to 16th, we will run our European Identity and Cloud Conference in Munich. It is a fully hybrid event, so you can participate online or you can visit the event in Munich. Both is possible. It will be packed by sessions, so we have run about 180 sessions, social events, and networking opportunities. As I've said, both in an online and in an on-site format combined, and we hope to see you there. For the webinar itself, we are doing a recording. So we are recording the webinar. We will make the podcast of the recording, and we will also make the slide decks available for download short term. We will have a Q&A session by the end of the webinar, and you can enter questions at any time. The more questions we have, the more lively the Q&A session is, so don't miss to enter the questions you have to the experts talking in this webinar. And last but not least, we will run a few polls during the webinar and discuss the results during the Q&A. For the agenda, it's split into three, or maybe we could say also 4 parts. Today, in the first part, I'll give a very, very brief perspective on the past and future evolution of Zero Trust. In the second part, then Milan Patel first, and then Anshuman will talk about their perspectives on Zero Trust, discuss the importance of a roadmap, and other practical approaches to Zero Trust. So how to make Zero Trust really a reality. This is what Milan and Anshuman will talk about. And then in the third part, we will have our Q&A session. And as I've said, the more questions we have, the better it is. Before I start my presentation, let's start the first poll, which is a very simple question to answer with yes or no, which is, have you already considered Zero Trust, so a Zero Trust strategy for your organization? I'll give you some seconds to answer, and so please do the poll, give your perspective. Where are you with Zero Trust? Is it already something you're working on? I would say we do another 10 to 15 seconds. Okay, so let's close that poll. Thank you very much. And that is where I then start with my part of the presentation. Zero Trust, it is a term we have heard a lot of times in the past years. It's relatively old, so that I think it's already past the 10th anniversary, but it really became popular, I would say, starting with the pandemic, because that really changed the way organizations had to run their IT with work from home, with a lot of need for agility in the digital business and the evolution of organizations from traditional to digital business, etc. Zero Trust, at the end of the day, is a paradigm. It is a sort of a concept, a philosophy, however you'd like to phrase it, and it's about a simple thing, which is don't trust, in the sense of don't trust a single system, but always verify. So it started when we go back to the roots of Zero Trust. It started with saying, don't trust the security you have at the perimeter, like the firewall, and then think if someone has passed that, if someone is in your internal network, then it's safe, because there's the lateral movement, there are things like that. So Zero Trust is the principle for doing cybersecurity right and avoiding traditional pitfalls that arise from depending on a system that then turns out to be not as secure as you have hoped. It's also very important today because it's about a security for an open world, a world where the traditional perimeter doesn't play that major role anymore it did many years ago. And I think this is just reality today. People are working from everywhere. Services are running everywhere. And that's what it's about, enabling everyone to work from everywhere with every device, using every service, regardless of where the service runs. So this is really the quintessence. And so zero trust is nothing where you say, okay, I go out, this is a one-stop shopping, and I buy that tool, and then I have it. Because again, then you would say, this is the one tool I trust in, and exactly this is not what you're doing. You need to understand that there are different elements. And so in my perspective, there are a couple of main building blocks or main areas to look at. So to have a sort of a layered security, because zero trust is very much really about layered security. And identity management, by the way, is a very important thing. And when we look at what is happening, so a user is coming in with a device over whatever type of network or whatever series of networks to systems and applications. So the user at the end is doing something. He's using a service that runs on a system, that runs in the cloud, wherever, and then there's also data involved. That is, at the end, what we have. And so we can relatively easily get a grip on the user. Authentication is something we do anyway. So we authenticate the user, we can make it probably more secure. So MFA is the first thing always to do if you doesn't have it in place yet. The device is more tricky because a lot of these devices at the end are not corporate-owned devices. So managing them is more complex, and that's why I didn't go for a green but a yellow light here. The networks maybe are the most complicated area, unless you go back to something where you say, oh, I trust it, I route everyone with the VPN into my network, and then they are secure anymore. But apparently, it's apparent that this is not. It's obvious it is not zero trust anymore. If you say I trust the VPN, then you're doing the exact opposite of it. And by the way, routing everything through your own network doesn't really work in today's world of mobile users, work from home, cloud services, etc. It doesn't make much sense. Then you have the systems and the applications. That is something you have some control about, sometimes more, sometimes less. So some workloads you have a good grip on others, maybe to a lesser extent. So it's also a lot about, and we have a ton of recordings and reports about the responsibility split between tenants and providers when you use cloud services, for instance. So there's a lot of thinking behind it, but you can get a good grip on that. And then there's data at the end of the day. And zero trust means that you look at where do you need to implement controls? Where do you need to implement security at which levels? And it's a lot of that. And it goes even beyond that because zero trust is evolving. And when we look at this evolution, at the beginning, there was the network. So zero trust started with zero trust networks. And this is, at the end of the day, something which is relatively hard to control compared, for instance, to, okay, device, sometimes easy, but to the users or application or the data. So it evolved from the network to the perspective on device and systems and applications, then the user, and then the data. This is the evolution, and it's not the end yet. So from zero trust, it is going beyond that to a perspective which also looks at the comprehensive zero trust. And what we need to add, and this is what I put at the top here, we also need to look at, can we trust the software? Can we trust the services? So you might just have heard about this PowerShell or no, Power Automation, I think, vulnerability or Power BI. I don't know. I have to look it up. It just came up this morning. So there's one of these vulnerabilities in more in the zero trust, in the no code, low code environments. Too much zero in that, and it means, can you trust, for instance, the platform you're building your no-code, low-code solutions on. Can you trust the software you get? We remember the SolarWinds attack and others, Kaseya. So what can you trust? And we need to even further extend it to software and also to which extent can we trust the environments we're building, we're running our workloads on. So we really need to understand zero trust doesn't stop, but it continues to evolve. And this is not an architecture, and I put architecture into the quotas. It is really just a picture which shows there are many technical solutions you can use within your zero trust model. You will not use all of them. You need to understand which of them are really relevant to you, but it's really a broad set of technologies which help you to implement a layered security, to implement something where you don't trust a single entity, but where you have a lot of points of verification. What you need to do is really to understand your risks first. What is really at risk? Your requirements. So what do you need? Then look at your architecture. So how does your zero trust architecture, your layer security look like? What do you have already? What is there? What is missing? And then you can go into the prioritization and implement the most important parts and run it. As I've said, starting with MFA, for instance, is always a good idea. Before I hand over to Milan, I quickly want to launch the second poll here, which the question here is, do you already have an approach for implementing a comprehensive zero trust model defined? So the one thing is looking at zero trust, the other is, do you already look at a multi-layered approach for that, or is it something where you're more at the zero trust network level? I'll give you again a couple of seconds to answer this question. So let's give you so come on, some 10 more seconds. Okay, looks done. Perfect. So with that, back to the agenda. So after this very high level intro and perspective, as I've said, I'd like to hand over to Milan Patel, who will, of IBM, who will talk about his perspectives on this theme, and I'll make him the moderator. So Milan, it's your turn.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks everyone again for joining this webinar. What I wanted to cover now was a perspective of what we as IBM are looking to drive when we think about zero trust. As Martin mentioned in the beginning of the call, I am the product manager for our IBM Security Verify SaaS solution, our IDaaS that we have in market today. And what I want to talk about is the approaches that we're talking and we're seeing as part of a business-driven outcome in driving and starting with a zero trust posture in terms of entry points and being able to drive that. So when we think about zero trust and when we think about what our customers are asking us, it really starts with understanding the motivations and aligning them to business-centric approaches. Now, when we think about zero trust in the context of business-driven approaches, we really see 4 starting points when we think about this from a end-to-end perspective. The first is around privacy and preserving customer privacy. So this is around, when we think about zero trust, we think about it in the context of traditional enterprise workforce use cases, but zero trust postures and zero trust approaches from a business perspective can also be applied to consumers and customers, right? So this is around how you simplify the onboarding and registration of users, allow users to manage their privacy and consent, and then enforce specific privacy regulations and controls as it relates to a proper zero trust posture, and enrolling and rolling out things to make it seamless from a multi-factor and management preference perspective. Although traditionally zero trust has been looked at in the context of enterprise, we see a business pattern where preserving that customer privacy is critical and equipping end users with the ability to protect their experiences, their accounts is critical. The second one that we see as we move to the right is around protecting the hybrid cloud. And I think this is something that all of us can understand and appreciate the complexities associated with how the modernization of legacy applications, moving to cloud, moving to different deployments in clouds, and having that full visibility of control of how to manage users' access to that, how to control all the access associated with that, and being able to monitor the activity and update real time the configurations needed to ensure a proper zero trust posture. As I introduce this, I want to talk about these four, and then I'm going to dive into one specifically. This next one is around reducing the risk of insider threat. So this is where there's a pattern of identifying the scenarios for enforcing least privileged access, understanding user behavior and anomalies integrated with existing systems to be able to identify threat and then trigger the proper remediation that's needed in the context of an enterprise. And then the last one, which is one that we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into as part of a specific use case and a scenario and starting point that we, even in IBM, are starting on relative to our transformation, is around securing the hybrid workforce. So this is around how we look to enable bring your own devices as part of secure managed and unmanaged devices, how to enroll and provide a rollout of multi-factor and even go passwordless, but also how you put all these into context to then understand adaptive risk scores associated with how users are accessing based on the notion of this remote workforce where employees may be accessing systems from different locations, and being able to not compromise the security, but also provide a seamless experience to increase productivity is another area that we've looked at as part of business drivers and business-centric outcomes as part of aligning to a zero trust approach. Now, as I mentioned, securing the hybrid workforce is a blueprint, right? The four items that I mentioned earlier are considered blueprints of how a comprehensive zero trust approach can be identified and aligned to address a use case end-to-end oriented outcome. Now, when we think about this in the context of securing the hybrid workforce, putting on the lens from an identity and access management standpoint, which is what I live and breathe every day, this is where we think about how we allow remote workers, office workers to access various secure resources that are high level, high transaction oriented in terms of the value that it is to the enterprise, whether it's internal, external, collaboration suites, whether it's access to firewalls, whether it's access to the data center infrastructure platform, as well as key business applications. What we see in terms of the need from an identity and access management standpoint, which are the items that you see in the purple squares, is around doing, as Martin mentioned, multi-factor authentication, which is a starting point, but enabling that such it has integration points into devices so that you can do and provide conditional based on users coming in from managed or unmanaged devices, as well as rolling out a risk-based score to identify risky behavior through adaptive access. Now, again, these are just the blueprints from an IBM perspective that we see critical as evaluating and then aligning in the context of a proper zero trust business outcome driven approach, specifically around securing the hybrid workforce. And what you'll see is our view in using these blueprints across the other entry points that we've indicated as part of the business outcomes, but really wanted to focus on and evaluate and articulate sort of what we're doing in the context of securing the hybrid workforce. So with that, what I do want to share is a story of what we've been doing internally at IBM. Our goal, and this is actually something that we've been evaluating before COVID, but we wanted to provide a proper rollout for a digital transformation for all IBM employees, 600,000 plus user population, both contractors and regular employees, as part of modernizing how productivity is done, while also providing a secure means of interacting with workforce-oriented use cases and workforce-oriented workflows. Now, as we think about this, this really lends itself to securing the hybrid workforce. And even so, going into the notion when we think about the hybrid workforce, the remote workforce. Now, over the 2-year period, there were a set of goals and criteria that we set out. The first is the first was around how we modernize the applications and security frameworks. A lot of applications were non-standard applications or older applications as part of business processes that we modernized to more microservices-oriented architectures, as well as using these standards-based approaches for security, so that enrolling and enabling things like multi-factor risk-based became easier using standards-based OpenID Connect and SAML. But the other notion here was there were some applications that needed to remain on premises due to regulatory requirements. And part of that was, how do we enable those applications to be protected from the cloud to allow for that agility while also remaining compliant to some of those aspects in the context of business requirements. As I mentioned, this protection of the remote workforce started out with the securing the hybrid workforce, where we rolled out MFA to all 600,000 employees. The rollout of that consists of 2 methods of MFA, as well as the ability to go passwordless across all the applications that IBM employees interface with. And then the last thing that was important for us was, as part of that data residency requirements, a lot of the user information registries needed to remain on premises, and doing so without having to re-architect or open up the network firewalls. And this is what, from an IBM solution standpoint with Verify, allowed IBM to seamlessly move those applications and do the authentication with those users that remained on premises, and starting to onboard and move those applications to the cloud and still preserve that authentication experience. But what that also allowed was the ability to then add on the advanced capabilities for multi-factor and adaptive access. And this also takes into account that all of our devices that we get are managed with our mobile device endpoint solution, as well as bring your own devices are enabled as well as part of this. And again, putting this in the context of how to secure the remote hybrid workforce and ensuring that proper zero trust posture. Again, starting out with the IAM portion in the hybrid workforce scenario. Now, on the right, you'll see our login experiences as IBM employees, where you can see that I can log in with my traditional credentials, username and password, in which it would prompt an MFA, or I can do things around QR code or even FIDO, as I've enrolled as an employee in IBM as part of the rollout and the transformation that we're doing. But the main message here is the journey helps, as part of zero trust and as part of securing the hybrid workforce, was a business outcome in driving the modernization, as well as securing the user experience and enabling how employees become more productive in terms of their workflows and their experiences. So with that, what I did wanted to also mention was the solution and the platform that was used. IBM Security Verify SaaS, for those that don't know, is a comprehensive IDaaS platform. And as part of that IDaaS platform, we offer a rich set of capabilities as part of the identity as a service that include things around single sign-on, multi-factor, risk-based authentication in terms of an access-oriented solution. But we also are bringing key governance capabilities that are in market today as part of our solution, as part of our identity governance capabilities that are all available through the identity as a service offered by IBM Security Verify. Now, the items in purple underneath each of these use cases that we offer as part of our SaaS platform today are the things that the IBM transformation took advantage of as part of enabling the use cases for securing the hybrid workforce. But all of what I've described in the previous slide was enabled by IBM Security Verify SaaS as the IDaaS that delivered that value to customers. Not only from an IBM perspective, but also other customers that we've been working with. For example, a local city department of education was able to migrate their users and go into a remote learning experience that would typically take 6 months and condense that into 2 weeks. And using Verify SaaS, they were able to accelerate that remote learning experiences for parents, teachers, and students when COVID struck. And again, Verify SaaS was used to enable and facilitate those that transformation. Now, with that, the last thing that I want to end on before I hand it over to Anshuman is the blueprints that we described are something that we use, as I mentioned, as the starter to drive for that business-driven outcome. We share that blueprint related to securing the hybrid workforce, which you'll see on the bottom right. But there's other blueprints that we have that we use in conversations with customers, partners, and how we can then map that to not only the journey that customers want as part of their zero trust approach, but also then aligning that to then the key capabilities and platform requirements to do that, whether it's using something that is provided from IBM Security or being interoperable and extensible into existing investments as part of enabling a proper zero trust approach. And I think that's a key item here, knowing that organizations tend to practice some aspects of zero trust today, but a lot of it is formalizing it in the context where you have that end-to-end business-driven outcome approach. And that's really sort of the perspective and the value that we bring as part of not only from a alignment perspective, but also from an enabling technology perspective to help accelerate zero trust adoption across all the use cases within an enterprise that an enterprise can see. Now, with that, what I wanted to end was how folks can start with zero trust in terms of learning, getting started, and improving that posture. I know this is a set of links to just get started, but this is really sort of in more detail articulating some of the things that we offer as part of enabling and starting that zero trust transformation. Really bridging off of, again, the use cases and the success stories that we've seen not only internally in IBM, but outside with customers that we're working with. And with that, I'm going to pass it off, stop sharing first, and then hand it off to Anshuman.
Thank you, Milan, and I'm handing over to Anshuman, making him the moderator. So Anshuman, it's your turn.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Milan. Really appreciate everyone joining, coming together to hear about our short stint about zero trust. 1 hour is not enough. But from Persistent, my name is Anshuman Goswami. I look after the global security services business for Persistent, based out of New Jersey. You have heard about the context, why zero trust, and how, to some extent, from Milan. I'm going to throw some more colors about our experience with our client base. And zero trust is a journey. Martin has alluded to it. But a decent ecosystem prevails within a lot of mature clients, the profiles that we manage, where we have client base has invested. But that's not enough. I would like to talk a little bit about why zero trust in the first place. In 2009, an analyst from Forrester introduced this concept. It's not to yield zero trust within employees or customers or suppliers. But what it yields more towards implementing the design principles where we cannot trust any data feed, any device, any users' behaviors. And Martin alluded beautifully on that front. I would like to draw your attention to recent breach reports. Verizon's data breach investigation report that came out earlier this year articulates leading action varieties in breaches constitute phishing. Second is ransomware. Third, top of the list is misconfigurations. And the list goes on. But these are fundamental shifts that we are seeing post-pandemic, if we can consider that we are in the post-era. But organization today gaining grounds from security investments. It's not all dark and grim. 2015, some stats say 1/3 of the attacks were successful. But latest, some of the researchers allude about 1/8 of the attacks are successful. So there is a shift. We are making some progress, but there are too much to do. A very interesting read caught my eyes only recently while preparing for this presentation from Krebs on Security, a blog, very renowned personality in the security ecosystem. It's published in August 19, 2021. It's not very old. Very unique use cases emerging. Disgruntled employees to deploy ransomware. Just pause and think for a minute. He goes on stating, criminal hackers emailing employees directly to unleash malware inside a profitable enterprise network for a profit-sharing model. Just pause. Very interesting finding and read. I would highly recommend whoever is participating in this webinar, go and take a look at this entire experience which came out in his blog. Very interesting. So the criminal intent and creativities are emerging and are emerging in good creativities from not only criminal enterprises, but nation states. That's probably the fundamental shift this COVID pandemic has propelled these businesses to drive towards digital, and the nuances of convolutions of the digital proliferation or transformations are creating the undulations of attack surfaces. APTs are, I mean, you wouldn't realize that you are already breached. So these are some of the stats our friends in Gartner has published around in March. 30% of enterprise locations will only use WAN connectivity from 15% in 2020. 30%, 2024 would use secure web gateway, CASB, ZTNA. So these stats gives an indication, but I think we are at a point where these stats are overridden by acceleration from our client base. Some of the pillars that rationalizes why we embrace zero trust, remote work and working anywhere. I think this concept is, and both Martin and Milan alluded towards some of the use cases they are experiencing and promoting. I think this is the foundation of the shift in the architecture. Shift in the architecture requirements that enterprises need to start thinking where to start. It's not that they have not started or invested yet, but with the kind of working anywhere cloud adoption momentum, network and security controls are converging, and there is a need to do that. and I will speak towards that in the subsequent areas. Zero trust edge computing is where the data sources are getting close to the users. The compute power is shifting towards users. Talking about the building blocks of zero trust component framework, we are seeing a traditional perimeter-based network-oriented security architecture is shifting to continuous verification of trust. Approach to deliver outcomes could be numerous. On a pragmatic approach is to, just like any other portfolio of programs, you outline the various work streams and outcomes of your journey. That's easier said than done. Most of our clients have invested in platforms addressing various key tenets of security functions, but this new norms of delivering business from a hybrid of on-prem and cloud requires a new architecture and a mindset of processes and ownerships. It's not technology alone that needs to be factored in the roadmap. Stitching components, as you can observe, using automation layers bring efficiency to catch the bad guys. Continuous monitoring and verifying trust. I think new log feeds are emerging as we are strengthening the security, information and event management whole architecture of security operations. Layered by the SOAR. Automation. Blocking the bad guys from moving laterally using micro and macro segmentations. Those are some of the themes that our clients are struggling. What's the starting point? How we can help? When we work with our client base, we assess and build the requirements to define current investments of hardware and software using NIST, CSF, or CIS benchmarking capabilities. Create a practical and pragmatic approach to define business case in a phased approach. No one vendor will provide full stack of functionality. And that's reality. Let's take for an example, data security functions. There's several data security functions that needs to be considered during the early stages of your program design. Data discovery, data classification. Within data classification of structured data, semi-structured data, unstructured data. Very few partners provide all these capabilities today. Data obfuscation, data archival. Now, a very interesting point came up when we were talking to a financial organization, financial client of ours. He said, I have BCPDR. I got hit by a ransomware. 1 day's loss of transactions will hit me badly. I need point-in-time recovery. Can you bring that? Which partner on the planet brings that capability? So, lessons learned, data privacy, data deletion. And if you are operating out of Europe, you know well-known GDPR requirements. So these are some of the nuances which you have already invested probably, but need to stitch into the new architecture. The new themes, what we are looking through a different lens today. The traditional security domains, standalone domains, are never relevant today. I cannot say I have all infrastructure security, network security, and cloud security controls in place. Do I have identity and access management and IGA principles threading these perimeter security, application security, and data security, and even governance, risk, and compliance? So it needs to be seen from preventive approach and a reactive approach. So all these towers, as you can observe, assume breach and contain. You are assuming you are already breached. So this mere theme itself lends you to define a preventive control so that if you are to design, you are assuming you are breached, what all controls do you need? So we tried to articulate the portfolio of projects and transitioning them to operations in a phased manner, but integrating across security domains. Today, integration of security domains is the key to leverage the strengths of Zero Trust. If I have to define the steps to start for a Zero Trust, I would do a discovery of assets, do a threat modeling, mapping transaction flows, data flows, and process flows, create a business case for stakeholders buy-in. That's super critical. And this has resulted in creating this Zero Trust governance and operating model, where business IT ownership is extremely crucial to deliver a business resilience office. One of the CISOs asked me, I have a risk office, I have an engineering office, why do I need another office? Risk office, engineering office is very IT centric. Today, we need to think through more with a broader stroke of business resilience instead of IT resilience. And that's what we had put together, this framework of creating roles of architecture, creating roles of different domains that are relevant for Zero Trust governance and rolling out this operating model. So with that, I think we can go on and on. We would like to discuss later on the challenges, what these programs will bring to the table, but security, access, and service edge is the backbone, and Zero Trust network access is the mindset. With that said, I will pass on this thread to Martin.
Okay, thank you, Anshuman. So the next part of our agenda is the Q&A, and I'll also unmute Milan. So Milan and Anshuman, we right now then can pick or deliver the answers to the questions we already have received. So we have a couple of questions here, and I'm happy for the attendees to enter further questions. The more we have, the better it is. And I'd like to start with a, on one hand, simple, on the other hand, probably very complex to answer question. Here, maybe to Anshuman first, and then maybe Milan, which is, how long does it take to implement Zero Trust?
May I take that?
Yes, go ahead.
Showing you. So it's a journey. So it depends on the maturity of the ecosystem, of course. And as I have alluded earlier, in 2009, after Forrester came out with this concept, we review our client ecosystem. We have already invested in different technologies, different processes. It's extremely dependent on the assessment outcome of your current security investments and current security posture, right? It can be some of our clients, we have established roadmap from 18 to 24 months, right? But it's right after 24 months, you cannot say I'm Zero Trust, okay, enabled. It's a continuous process. As I have mentioned earlier, you need to continuously monitor and validate your trust.
And I like that answer, Anshuman, because I think that fits very well to that. So you can have some level of Zero Trust very quickly, and you never will be ready in some way, because also I would say the concept, as I've talked about, is evolving. there are new things to look at. So we learned the hard way in the past 12 months that looking at software, not trusting software, is very essential because we have the third-party software risks. And there will be other things we will learn over time. So it's a journey, and also the way we do IT is evolving. And I think this is the point, and I think it's important to understand it, and to understand zero trust also is an important principle, which means when you do something, is it because you then feel, oh, this thing makes me secure, which is critical, or because you do it because it helps you to add another layer, another element to your security model to have more verification? I think this is the point. Milan, do you also want to add something to that question before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I think I think the general comment is mileage may vary, and that may be ambiguous, but what I do want to give is, you know, the data points, and reiterating what I mentioned earlier, right? So we had a city Department of Education come to us, and COVID hit earlier in 2020, right? And they needed to immediately move to remote workforce and remote learning. And that was a typical 6-month period that we accelerated to 2 weeks. Now, that part of that was because they already had the foundation in place, right? And part of that was then enabling MFA, enabling all the tablets that they needed for those that didn't have internet connection or access to internet, things of that nature. But the other one was, you know, us as IBM, we were on a 2-year journey, but a lot of that was because of, you know, population, number of applications, and just rolling out. But as Anshuman mentioned, it's a journey, right? And part of that is starting with a journey that delivers an outcome, and then sort of working with the existing constructs. I don't think it is practical to say we need to rip and replace everything, because there are maybe endpoint solutions that organizations have invested in. There's IAM solutions that organizations invested in. Part of that is aligning to what is existing and allowing that modularity and pluggability to then drive these business outcomes. So mileage may vary, but I think it's part of aligning and evaluating what exists today, and then defining sort of that roadmap, because as I mentioned, it could be just extending on top of what is there. It just requires a view into sort of an end-to-end evaluation and business driver and value.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And maybe then move to the next question. I think it's an interesting one, which at the end, I shorten it a little, is zero trust not just yet another buzzword? So I have a very, very clear perspective on that. And I think zero trust has evolved from a buzzword to something which is very real, very helpful as a paradigm, as a concept to structure what you do and what you focus on in security. Milan and Anshuman, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I can go. As I mentioned, and as you mentioned, Martin and Anshuman, zero trust for us is an existing framework of a posture that organizations need to really, really, really look at and evaluate. Because the conversations in zero trust, although it may seem like a buzzword, but when you look at it from the blueprint perspective, it really looks at putting a seamless flow of how data, how identities, how information is all streamlined and aligned, so that you have that commonality and barrier and visibility into everything that happens, right? When you think about this concentric circle of servers to then applications to users, like all of that needs to be in a aligned manner, so that you have that control and visibility, right? So although zero trust is the word that captures that, it's really the then driving force that requires the silos to be broken down across the interactions in what an enterprise has as part of you know, their resources, their users, their applications, and their data.
Martin, would you mind repeating the question once again?
Yeah, at the end, the question was, is zero trust not just yet another buzzword?
It could be termed as another phrase in industry, but essentially, risk is the problem, security is the solution, right? So if you look at through that lens, where I think we are converging with the new emergence of the new norms of working remotely and moving into cloud and increasing SaaS behaviors in the employees, customers, and supply chains, I think foundationally authentication and authorization is bringing that trust, correct? So stringing that authentication and authorization across different domains of security, and not only security, I would say it needs to be strung through the IT ecosystem, and it needs to go into the business processes. And that's where business is driven by digitalization or digital transformation because of this pandemic. And if you look into the history of pandemic, 1918 was first influenza. Still today we give flu vaccine, right? So this is going to stay. COVID is going to stay. Our experience, probably the window we are shortening with the advancements of using AI ML into our live stream. The window of experience of coming out of COVID's impact will shrink, but it's not shrinking within next 5 years or 10 years. If 100 years is previous influenza's impact, right? So this digital transformation is going to stay, and business is going to evolve more and more using digital strength to deliver changes in human behaviors. So taking that, trust is the basic requirement which needs to be there at every level, whatever we do. And I think it's coined it accurately and appropriately, and it's not late, I would say.
Okay, and maybe that's a good point to look at the poll results of the first poll first, and then the second of the polls. And the first poll, I think that shows also very clearly that I would dare to say that we are beyond the buzzword stage. So 85% of the participants said that they already are considering zero trust for the organization. So it's really something which is in focus of most organizations. That aligns with other surveys we did recently. When we then look at the second element, or the second question, the second poll, then there's a slightly different, but also related, and I would dare to say not surprising results. So it is that the numbers for do you really look at a multi-layered approach for zero trust? That number is lower than we are looking at zero trust. So it's still an evolution within zero trust towards this broader perspective where zero trust has evolved well beyond zero trust networks. But it is something which is real, which is in an implementation, in a conceptual state at various levels in organizations from what we see, what we observe in the market. And I think that fits quite well to what we just said about a buzzword. So having a very few minutes left, I'd like to ask Anshuman, you first, and then Milan for a short statement about what are, from your perspective, the main challenges, or maybe what is the main challenge in implementing a zero trust approach. Anshuman?
I can go on and on for an hour on that, but to sum it up, I think discovering your assets and doing a threat modeling is the key for your program plan or the portfolio plan towards accomplishing zero trust objectives. And setting up your business stakeholders and setting that business resilience office structure or framework within your organization and getting all the business application owners and data owners having one leg into that office is, I think, paramount for your success. Otherwise, the frictions and the business case rationalizing effort will jeopardize your progress.
Okay, Milan?
I think, I mean, Anshuman mentioned it. It's around understanding and realizing the investments there exist in the enterprise. The other thing that I'll mention is, I think we see a lot of entry points in how folks look at zero trust, right? They want to do it in the context of, a regulation. They want to do it in the context of a specific solution. They want to do it in the context of, a platform-based approach. But what we've seen success in is aligning it to a business goal. And part of that is that evaluation that needs to be done in where the organization wants to move as part of a modernization or digital transformation roadmap, and then aligning that to an outcome of how zero trust can help fortify, accelerate, and provide a more secure approach to doing that. Whether it's shifting to a remote workforce, whether it's moving applications to the cloud, whether it's addressing consumer use cases, right? Those are the things that we see as business outcomes. And then really aligning that roadmap to how you would embed zero trust in that context with the either existing investments that organizations have or investments that need to be made to align and ensure that zero trust approach.
Okay, perfect. Milan, thank you very much. We are unfortunately already at the end of the time. I think as Anshuman also said, we could probably spend a couple of hours discussing zero trust, but right now it's time to say thank you to all the attendees of this KuppingerCole webinar. Hope to have you soon back in one of our webinars or at the IC conference in our hybrid format, being online or in Munich. Thank you very much, Anshuman and Milan, for your input, and talk to you soon again.
Thank you, Martin.